Shalom, friends. Welcome to another Shear in Talmud. We're learning Masechet Berachot, the tractate dealing with blessings. We're learning from the Koren Talmud Bavli, as you can see in front of you, through the efforts of Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. And as you see, it's a very beautiful edition with English translation, notes, everything to help us get through. If you find anything that I'm not translating correctly, or you want extra help and see what's going on, please follow along in the edition that you see in front of you. I'm Eliyahu Shear. I'm coming to you from Chesed ve'emet. You can find my site on www.lovingkindness.co, and we're broadcasting from the holy city of Yerushalayim. So we're on Daf Yud Amud Beis. We're on page 10b, and we're on a new section at this point in time. We've just completed the idea of davening the Shemona Esrei from last week, where we said that there's two mitzvahs that we need to know about. The first mitzvah is that when we daven, we should daven with our legs together, our feet should be together, comparable to the malachim, the angels, who also look like they have only one foot, because the angels fly about and attend to their particular services through flying, as opposed to having to walk around like we walk around on the earth. And therefore we should resemble them by davening with our feet together. The second important halakha that we learned at the end of last week is the importance of davening before eating. So that means to say that ideally, if a person can, he should certainly daven, for example, shachris at the very least, without having eaten breakfast before davening shachris. Of course, if a person is ill, or they need the energy and they're not feeling right, then the question is a whole different question. And as he said before, each person should ask his accepted halakhic authority, an orthodox rabbi who will assist one, and to know what is the right thing to do for oneself. And now we continue inside. And the Gemara begins the following. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Rabbi Yehoshua says, Ad shalosh shaot, until 3 hours. What is he referring to exactly? We're going back to the Mishna. Let's not forget, the way of the Gemara is that it presents itself with the Mishna, and thereafter it begins the Gemara, which is a discussion on the Mishna. As a result of the process of Gemara, things move from one subject to the next. But ultimately, we have to come back to what the Mishnah was saying, so that we can clarify exactly what is the halakha with regards to what the Mishnah said. So the Mishnah says the following: Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Omar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said, halakha ka Rabbi Yehoshua. The halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, which means to say that one may recite the Keriat Shema at Shachris right up until 3 hours of the day. Again, we've discussed this numerous times. We're speaking about halachic hours, which means to say, if a day consists of 12 hours, that's very easy, which means to say that when we speak about sunrise and sunset, the sun is rising, let's say, at 6 o'clock, and the sun is setting at 6 o'clock, and there are 12 hours in the day. So each halachic hour is one full hour that we know about of 60 minutes. But if sunrise is at 4 o'clock in the morning and sunset is at 8 o'clock in the evening, so then a halachic hour is going to be a much longer period than 60 minutes in order to accommodate 12 periods of that amount of what 1 hour is. And therefore, the best thing to do, as I've suggested numerous times in the shiurim, is to get yourself a calendar which will show you the halachic times on it. Or alternatively, as we've discussed many times, you can go online to a site called myzmanim.com, and there you will find the calendar to suit your particular country, wherever you live, your particular town, your city, wherever you live, and it shows you the exact times of the day that you can perform the various mitzvot. So let's assume, for example, on average, let's just say it is 6 o'clock until 6 o'clock. Then, of course, one could recite the Keriat Shema until 9 o'clock in the morning, which is a quarter of the day. That is the correct time period. And as we see over here, Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehoshua, which means we have until 3 hours in which to say the Keriat Shema. What does that mean exactly? It doesn't seem to make sense. I can say Keriat Shema any time that I want to, and I could still say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I can say it any time of the day that I want. What does it mean that the mitzvah is only until a quarter of the day, 3 hours into the day? Let's continue. Somebody who reads the Keriat Shema from this period of time and onwards, what happened to the fellow? He woke up late. He woke up at 9 o'clock in the morning. He had a late night. He wasn't focused. He was lazy. I don't know what the reason is. But at the end of the day, he woke up late and he's not going to make reading the Keriat Shema in the correct time. Here's a practical one for us. The practical one is davening on Shabbos. Of course, many minyanim start much later on Shabbos. You might find that a minyan on Shabbos begins at 8:30 in the morning, maybe even 10 to 9. Well, if the minyan begins at that time, you're certainly not going to be able to qualify to say the Keriat Shema by 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, what are you to do then? How do you fulfill the mitzvah? Because according to this, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. So we know, for example, that if a person is faced with such a situation, practically speaking, he should certainly say the Keriat Shema before the time period, and at least he fulfill his obligation for saying the Keriat Shema as he should. What does he do with the brachot? Let's learn about that now as we read on. So, according to the Gemara at this point in time, somebody who reads from this point onwards didn't lose out. I don't know what that means exactly. It just says he didn't lose out. If we read the note on the side over here, it says, although he does not fulfill the mitzvah of reciting the Shema at its appointed time, he is nevertheless considered like one who reads the Torah and is rewarded accordingly, which means nobody loses out, according to this opinion at this point in time. Nobody loses out on saying the Shema. But he does lose out on one thing, and that is that he didn't say the Keriat Shema in the correct time. There is a mitzvah to recite the Keriat Shema in the correct time, and he lost it. Omar Rav Chisda, Omar Mar Ukva, Rav Chisda said that Mar Ukva said, Ubilvad shelo yomar yotzer or. This is all on condition that he doesn't say yotzer or. If we're following in the Siddur, we'll notice that yotzer or is the bracha that precedes the Keriat Shema. We'll know, in fact, that there are 2 brachot that precede the Keriat Shema in the morning. And according to Rav Chisda, who's speaking in the name of, who says it, that Mar Ukva said that the halacha is, but don't say Yotzer Or, because Yotzer Or already is a bracha, which means to say you can fulfill your obligation of saying the Keriat Shema, but don't recite the bracha, because that you've lost out on. Let's read it inside here. So he says here, who forms light, or the rest of the blessings recited along with Shema, as they pertain only to the fulfillment of the mitzvah of reciting of the morning Shema. After the 3rd hour, they are inappropriate. That's what the Gemara says at this point in time. Meisivei, the Gemara raises an objection. What's the objection? Which means to say, I'm going to give you another teaching which doesn't say like what we've learned over here. It says the following. It says in the other brisa that somebody who reads from this point and onwards, lo hefsid, he didn't lose out. According to the first teaching that we learned about, he lost out. According to the second teaching in this brisa, he didn't lose out, but rather, ka'adam shehu koreh b'Torah. He's to be considered like a person who is reading from the Torah. And a person can read Torah all day long, and he doesn't lose out. However, he blesses 2 blessings before the Keriat Shema, and he makes a bracha after Keriat Shema, which precedes the recital of the Shemona Esrei. The Gemara concludes and says this is a refutation of Rav Chisda. It is tiyuvta. Indeed, it is a refutation, because we learned above over here that according to Rav Chisda above, who was speaking, that Mar Ukva said that he mustn't say Yotzer Or, according to this brisa, he doesn't lose out at all. It says over here, he may certainly make the brachot. He makes the brachot. However, the status of the mitzvah of reciting the Keriat Shema is not the mitzvah of reciting Keriat Shema, Rather, it is like a person who simply is reading from the Torah. We can read the Torah all day long. You can fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah all day long. No problem. Amri, there are those that say, Omar Rav Chisda, Omar Mar Ukva. Some say that the teaching was not like what it was said above, but rather Rav Chisda said that Mar Ukva said. In other words, don't think what he said before, that you couldn't say Yotzer or it's not correct, but rather the teaching goes as follows. My law have said. What does it mean that it says he didn't lose out? Shelo have said brachot. He didn't lose out on the brachot. That's what it means. According to this particular teaching that was said in another way, it seems to be that they heard incorrectly. Rav Chisda didn't say you couldn't say the Yotzer bracha, but rather he said, Lo have said brachot. You will not lose out on the brachot. You may make the brachot, no problem. Tanya nami hachi. It was taught also over here in another brisa. So too it was taught hakire mikan ve'elach. Somebody who reads from this point and onwards, which means after the 3-hour period, lo have said he didn't lose out on anything. Ka'adam shekeireh b'Torah. It's like a person who's reading from the Torah, and the Torah you can read all day long. Aval mevarech shtayim lefaneha v'achat la'achareh. But still, nevertheless, even though it's not really the mitzvah of the Keriat Shema in its correct time, still recite the bracha, recite 2 brachot before the Keriat Shema and 1 bracha after the Keriat Shema. Omar Rabbi Mani said, Gadol hakerei Keriat Shema ba'onasa. Great is the person who recites the Keriat Shema in its time. Yeser me'ha'osek b'Torah. Greater than the person who is involved in the study of Torah. It is a greater mitzvah to say the Keriat Shema in its correct time over the study of Torah. Midakatani, as it is taught, hakore mikan ve'elach, because a person who reads from here and onwards, lo said, he didn't lose out. Ka'adama koreh b'Torah. He's considered to be like a person who studies Torah, which means to say, after the time, he doesn't lose out in the sense that it's as if he's still studying Torah, that he doesn't lose out on. Mikalal, consequently, we can infer from this, the Keirei ba'onasa, that a person who actively goes ahead and he reads the Keriat Shema in its correct time, hadif, is even greater. It's better. If a person has these 2 options, that, for example, he can sit and study Torah, and he'll miss out on saying Keriat Shema in the correct time, or he can say the Keriat Shema in its correct time, the greater mitzvah is to recite the Keriat Shema in its correct time. Let's take a look at the notes on the side of the page to get a bit more insight. So we're looking at the notes over here. One who reads from that time onward loses nothing. Ostensibly, there is room to raise the question, why would it enter my mind that reading Shema after its appointed time would be any worse than reading any other portion from the Torah? This statement seems superfluous. Some explain that nevertheless, the statement was necessary. One might have thought that reading this portion, in which the prescribed time for reading it is explicitly mentioned, after its appointed time, would call his sin to mind, and he would not even be rewarded for reading a portion from the Torah. Therefore, the Gemara states that he is rewarded. What a beautiful thought. A person might come along and he might say, maybe if I recite my Keriat Shema, and it is in the incorrect time, it's not just a case, did I fulfill the mitzvah or not? Because at the end of the day, I did not fulfill the mitzvah of reciting Keriat Shema in the correct time. Well, if I didn't recite the Keriat Shema in the correct time, perhaps it will call up like a prosecutor in front of Hashem, that even though I fulfilled this mitzvah, but I didn't fulfill it in the correct time, and therefore it will be held against me. Nevertheless, we learn it won't be held against the person. Rather, he should say the Keriat Shema. Even if he couldn't say the brachot, he should still say the Keriat Shema. But we learned over here, in any case, he can say the brachot. So don't worry about it. The notes continue. Greater is one who recites Shema at its appropriate time than the person who studies Torah. This statement appears to be self-evident, as it is obvious that one who recites Shema fulfills the mitzvah of reciting Shema as well as the mitzvah of Torah study. Therefore, the statement must be explained to mean that one who recites the Shema at its appropriate time is greater than one who recites other portions of the Torah, even if he studies them in depth. Another beautiful thought. That's what we're discussing at this point in time. Let's take a look at the practical halacha as he brings it down over here. Rabbi Yehoshua says, until 3 hours of the day, that is when we can say the Keriat Shema. The halacha is in accordance with Rabbi Yehoshua. The time for reciting the morning Shema is until the end of the third hour, which is 1/4 of the day, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. This is both because the halacha is generally ruled in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua in disputes with Rabbi Eliezer. So we learned a principle in the Gemara over here right now on the spot. When we have an argument between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua wins the argument. But nevertheless, even though that's the normal way, that has nothing to do with our discussion over here, in that Rabbi Yehoshua, in any case, wins the argument that the halacha is in accordance with his opinion. Irrespective of the argument that he has with Rabbi Eliezer, still his opinion holds greater weight in this particular halacha. And particularly because the Gemara explicitly states that the halacha is in accordance with his opinion. Brought down over here, anybody who would like to learn more about how we learn out the halacha of what we're learning in the Gemara into practical halacha, take a look at the Rambam, see the sources over here, and the Shulchan Aruch, see the source over here, and see how it's written in the actual code of Jewish law and the Rambam to see practically how we rule in the matter. And of course, a person who is studying Gemara and he wants to learn how we learn that halacha, it's very important that he takes these notes seriously and goes afterwards, consults into the Rambam and into the Shulchan Aruch, sees the halacha practically, and suddenly his eyes open up and he sees that what was discussed in the Gemara is brought down in practical halacha in this particular direction. And he learns how to see, how to learn that halacha from the words in the Gemara. Obviously, it's a much more complicated process than I've just described within a few sentences, but this is the basis of where we're coming from. And those people who are interested in pursuing their studies further, these are the type of things that he would have to look at. One who recites Shema from that time onwards, but he recites 2 blessings. So in other words, nevertheless, even though he's saying the Keriat Shema at the incorrect time, nevertheless, he's entitled to say those brachot, and he should certainly say them. If the time for reciting the morning Shema, the 3rd hour of the day, has passed, and he has not yet recited Shema, he may still do so with its blessings until the end of the 4th hour. So until the end of until a 1/3 of the day. Once it gets to a 1/3 of the day, he can still recite the brachot, but after that, then he's going to lose out on reciting the brachot. However, his reward in that case does not equal the reward of one who recited Shema at its appointed time. So the one who recites the Shema in the morning receives reward for reciting the Shema, number 1. And number 2, if he did it in the correct time, he receives an additional reward because he recited the Keriat Shema in the correct time. But if he didn't do it in the correct time, he receives reward for reciting Keriat Shema, but he doesn't receive reward for reciting in the correct time because he did not recite it in the correct time. If the 4th hour has passed, he may recite the Shema all day. However, he does not recite it with its blessings in accordance with the second version of Rav Chisda's statement and the brighter that supports his opinion. Now, we take a look here at the background of this statement that we learned over here, Tiyufta, the Rav Chisda, Tiyufta, which means it's a refutation of Rav Chisda. It was a refutation. What does it mean, refutation? The structure that we're learning about now in the Gemara to help us throughout all of our pages that we learn together, this structure is one of the most fundamental Talmudic expressions when the statement of an Amora, those are the rabbis involved in the Gemara discussions, and the time period when the Gemara was edited. Those rabbis at that time were called the Amoraim. So we see when the statement of an Amora is powerfully refuted by a Tanaitic source, which means the Tanaim who preceded the Amoraim, who are much greater. If we can find that the proof of the Tana is stronger, meaning the Tana, of course, is stronger because he comes before the Amora. If we can find that the Tana has contradicted the Amora, meaning that the Amora actually contradicted the Tana because the Amora comes afterwards. But so to speak, if we can go back and find the Tana who says the opposite of what this Amora is saying, so then this term So then we say, when the statement of an Amora is powerfully refuted by a Tanaitic source, this term, which literally means return, in the sense that his statement is sent back to him, tiyufta, like the word teshuva, it's the same type of root, tiyufta, going back, sums up the challenge. Occasionally, responses are provided to these challenges, but in cases like the one in our Gemara, there's no resolution, and his statement is rejected outright. We continue the discussion in the Gemara. Let us continue. Amri, there are those that say, Omar Rav Chisda, Omar Mar Ukva. Remember, we've been learning about this all the time. Rav Chisda said that Mar Ukva said, and some say like this, my loiv said, what does it mean that he didn't lose? He didn't lose out? Berachot. He didn't lose out on reciting the Berachot. Tanya Namiachi. It's taught here. It's also taught here. So we're just repeating this. From here onwards, he doesn't lose out. He's like a person who is reading from the Torah. But he recites 2 brachot before and 1 bracha afterwards. Omar Rabbi Mani, says Rabbi Mani, so we said that somebody greater is the person who is reading Keriat Shema in its time than the person who is studying Torah. Midakatani, as it is taught, said from here onwards, the person who's reading doesn't lose out. It's like a person who is reading the Torah. And here we learn that a person who reads in its time, adif, he is the greater. And that concludes that Mishna that we've learned of reciting the Keriat Shema in the morning up until 3 hours, and we've seen the practical halakha. Now we continue to the next Mishnah. Masnisin, our Mishnah. Beit Shammai Omrim, Beit Shammai say, meaning the school of Beit Shammai, say the following. Ba'erev, in the evening, Kol Adam Yatev Yikra. Every person should incline and recite. What does he mean? Ubabokir Ya'amot. And in the morning, he stands. What does he mean? Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, Ubeshoch becha uvekumecha. We read in the Keriat Shema that it says, and in your sitting down and in your getting up, in your rising. Beit Shammai is coming to teach us the way in which we should recite the Keriat Shema. In the evening, we should recline as we recite the Keriat Shema, and in the morning, we should stand up. Or at least we should be sitting up, at least as a minimum. But the main thing is to be in an upright position as a minimum. And certainly if one can stand, one should stand up. Why? Because since the verse says, and in your lying down and in your getting up, it's coming to teach us, according to Beit Shammai, that when we say it in the evenings, that's the time that we're going to lie down, we should do so in a lying down position, reclining. However, when we wake up in the morning, uvekumecha, that's when we wake up, we should also recite the Shema in the way that we get up in the morning. Since we get up out of our beds and we're standing up, the correct way to recite the Keriat Shema in the morning is to be standing up, or at least sitting up straight, meaning not reclining in lying down position, because it's a different part of the day. We get up and we're involved in activities. Beit Hillel Omrim, and the opposing school of Beit Hillel against Beit Shammai, they say, Kol Adam Korei Kedarko. Everybody should read according to the way they want to read it. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, Ubelechdecha v'derech, and in your going along the way, which means to say, the third part where it says Ubeshoch b'ka uvkumecha, Ubelechdecha v'derech, and in your going along the way. The going along the way is teaching us the way that we should recite the Keriat Shema. The Keriat Shema can be recited in any position that you want to, according to Beit Hillel. And let's not forget for a moment, I'm just introducing the topic, that in general, we always follow the opinion of Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel usually take a more comforting position, a more lenient position, and therefore the custom is, as we'll see in many, many cases in the Gemara, it will explicitly say, we follow the opinion of Beit Hillel, unless, of course, we explicitly don't follow the opinion of Beit Hillel, and we do follow the opinion of Beit Shammai. And then the Gemara will be specific and tell us those particular cases. Why are we following, in that instance, the opinion of Beit Shammai. But generally, we follow the opinion of Beit Hillel. Now, Beit Hillel, the school of Hillel, they say that a person should recite the Keriat Shema in any way that they want to. Fine. The Mishnah continues. Let's just read this halakha over here. The halakha says that every person recites as he is. One may recite the Shema while walking, standing, reclining, or riding on an animal. But one may not do so while lying on his back. Okay, so we learned out halakha over here. That's why we need to learn the practical halakha. That we can't learn the practical halakha entirely from the words of the Gemara. There's not enough words in the Gemara to give us the full scope of what the halakha is. And here is an example of such a point whereby if a person does not examine the halakha in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Rambam, he's going to lack a fortune of knowing what the halakha is. We cannot paskin the halakha straight from the Gemara in the sense that we can see every point mentioned in the Gemara. Rather, we need to learn the Mishnah, we need to learn the Gemara, we need to learn all of the commentaries on the Gemara and the Rishonim, and then afterwards we come to the halakha of the Rambam as part of the Rishonim, and the halakhas of the Rif and the Rosh and the Torah afterwards, and afterwards we come to when we start the generation of the Achronim, or at least in between the Achronim, depending on where we speak about Rabbi Yosef Karo as being, does he fit onto the side of the Rishonim or the Achronim? Well, at that point in time, Rabbi Yosef Karo takes over and gives us the halakha. And thereafter, we get the generation of the Achronim, or the later authorities. And until today, we find the modern poskim, Achronei Achronim, those who come after the Achronim. And we need to learn all these different opinions so that we can see what the practical application of the halakha is. Because had I not learned this halakha, I might have thought that indeed I can follow Beit Hillel and recite the Keriat Shema in any position that I want. But the halakha says no. The practical halakha is no. You can do it in any position that you want to, but don't do it on your back. That's what the halakha tells us. One who wishes to be stringent and who, when seated, stands in order to recite the Shema is called a transgressor, in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, as we're going to see in just a few moments. Brought down here again in the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, and anybody who wants to is welcome to see the halakha lema'aseh as it is presented in those books. So at this point in time, Beit Hillel say this is the way we do it, and the practical halakha says those who don't follow the way of Beit Hillel because they want to be stringent, they want to follow the opinion of Beit Shammai. I'm going to be stringent and follow the opinion of Beit Shammai. We say he's a transgressor. We cannot just make up rules in the Torah. Just because a particular rabbi mentions a particular thing doesn't mean that's the halakha. And just because we want to feel more strict about things, so we go ahead and we say, I'm going to be more strict. That does not mean that I'm a greater person. On the contrary, sometimes fulfilling that stricter opinion, which it does not call for fulfilling the stricter opinion, turns one into a transgressor, at least according to this opinion over here, and according to this discussion. If so, the Mishnah continues. Lama ne'emar. Why does it say, uveshoch beka uvekumecha? Hold on a second. What do the words come to teach me? If it says, uveshoch beka uvekumecha, you can imagine Beit Shammai is asking this question of Beit Hillel. They're saying the following. They're saying, what would you say, Beit Hillel? If the words say, uveshoch beka uvekumecha, the point is, if those words don't come to teach us how we recite the Keriat Shema, which would be reclining in the evening and standing up in the morning, well then what do the words come to teach us? Answers Beit Hillel, meaning Beit Hillel would answer us and they'd say to us, V'sha'a shebnei adam shochvim. These words are not coming to teach us how we recite the Keriat Shema at the different times when the mitzvah applies. They're coming to teach us when we recite the Keriat Shema. At the time that people are lying down, that's when we have a mitzvah to recite the Keriat Shema. And at the time that people are getting up, that's what the words mean, and it tells us that's the time to recite the Keriat Shema. It has nothing to do with the behavior of how we look, how we act when we recite, how we position ourselves when we recite the Keriat Shema. It simply tells us the timing. Well, that's very interesting. Omar Rabbi Tarfon. We keep that in mind, this little story that we're reading over here, because obviously we need to understand in more detail. I mean, If this is what it really means, then why would Beit Shammai teaching us that it means the way that we do it? And Beit Hillel is saying it's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with the time period. Well, if it has to do with the time period, then why does Beit Shammai teach us that it has to do with the way that we recite it? Interesting. Omer Rabbi Tarfon said, Ania Yisi Baba Derech. I was going along the path. I was going on my daily activities. I happened to be walking around somewhere. I was on a journey. V'hitaisi likros k'divrei Beit Shammai. And in other words, the time came about that I would now have to recite the Keriat Shema in the evening. And so therefore I inclined to recite the Keriat Shema just like Beit Shammai said. Now Beit Shammai were a big school of Torah. I mean, if Beit Shammai said that that's an opinion, surely that's an opinion. Now we go back to our discussion that we had before. So I was reclining and I wanted to fulfill the opinion like Beit Shammai. Is there something wrong with me? The sikanti ba'atzmi mipnei alistim. He says, but you know what? I put myself in danger on account of highway robbers. Oh, it seems to be that what happens over here is that it could be that he was attacked and something happened to him. And he's pointing out that when he laid down, he lost his concentration because he was lying down. He was focused more on the lying down. And obviously, if he was attacked in any way, he wasn't on his feet and he wasn't able to deal with the highway robbers who were attacking him, which at least if he was standing up and fulfilling the mitzvah according to Beit Hillel, meaning that he didn't have to fulfill the mitzvah according to Beit Shammai, maybe he would be more prepared. He would have noticed the highwaymen coming along and he would have saved himself. Amru lo, so they said to him, it was worthwhile for you. You were obligated by yourself. You need to put your life in danger. You're deserving of the. He said, you deserve to be in a position where you are liable to pay with your life. Because you transgressed the words of Beit Hillel. This is not a light thing. If Beit Hillel said that's the direction to follow, that's the direction to follow. Why were you fulfilling the mitzvah in accordance with Beit Shammai just because it's their opinion? Yes, I know Beit Shammai is a big school. They also have what to say. But nevertheless, we don't fulfill the mitzvah according to Beit Shammai. We fulfill according to Beit Hillel. Therefore, you excluded yourself from the halacha, which says follow according to Beit Hillel, and therefore you are liable on yourself. So therefore, we learn a powerful lesson, of course, over here that's teaching us that when we have to fulfill halacha according to an opinion, then that's the opinion that we must fulfill. And therefore, we mustn't make up stories in our minds about what the halacha is because we wish to be more stringent, or because we wish to fulfill a halakha according to a certain opinion that nobody even goes by. Before we do that, we need to ask a halakhic shaila. We need to ask a question from a responsible rabbinical authority. Rabbi, is this the correct thing? Is it okay if I fulfill this opinion? It's a very strict opinion over here. I feel that I want to fulfill it. Is it correct to fulfill it? Sometimes the rabbi will say, no, it is not correct. It is not correct for you to fulfill that particular opinion. You're putting your life in danger. What about a person, for example, on Shabbos? He's very, very ill. He's life-threatening. He says, you know what? Shabbos is so important. He says, therefore, I will keep the Shabbos day, and I'm sure that Hashem will protect me. I'm sure that I have opinions to rely upon. Well, maybe he doesn't have any opinions to rely upon. Maybe, happens to be, that saving a life is more important, and therefore you need to do everything that you can to get to the hospital, to a doctor, whatever it takes. You need to pick up the telephone and call them. You need to call the hospital. You need to call a paramedic. You need something. You need assistance. You need to do it immediately. Don't take stringent halachas into account when life is at stake. And this particular Rabbi Tarfon, he took his very life at stake over here when he fulfilled the opinion according to Beit Shammai, which he shouldn't have done. And therefore, they said to him, you're not fulfilling the halacha correctly. You put your life at risk because you fulfilled the halacha not in accordance with the practical halacha. Even though he was being stringent, even though he wanted to do something above the letter of the law, who cares what his reasoning was? He needed to have consulted at least with others to see, practically speaking, is that what we do? No, practically speaking, that's not what we do. It was Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon, of course, was one of the greatest of these rabbis of that generation. And we certainly can't criticize him in his greatness, but nevertheless, he took upon himself something that he shouldn't have done. Let's take a look here at the language One of the things that we see in this Koren Talmud Bavli is that he brings in certain words to help us understand the language of the Gemara. Do not forget that the Gemara is written in Aramaic, number one. And of course, there are Hebrew words as we see as we go along. One has to also learn the Aramaic. But in addition to that, the Gemara is filled with other languages as well. One of the languages that we find coming up again and again is the Greek language, because of course the Jewish people were immersed amongst the Greek people, and therefore they would pick up this language and they would use this word while they were talking. It was a Greek word. So many of the words, even if you have your Jastrow dictionary, in other words, you have a dictionary just of Aramaic terms, you might not necessarily find the exact translation, because in fact the word is a Greek word. Look at this word here, listim, highwaymen. The source of the word is from this Greek word over here, meaning thief or robber. The word originated in a misspelling. In rabbinic literature, when used in the singular, it generally refers to an unarmed thief. However, when used in the plural, it refers to gangs or armed robbers who primarily threaten travelers. We continue now on to Daf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph. We're on page 11, side A. The Gemara now begins its commentary on the discussion of the Mishnah. Bishlama Beit Hillel, all is well according to Beit Hillel. Why? Kama Farshita Maihu? Because they explain their reasoning of Ubeshoch Baka, Ubekumecha, and also Uvelech Baka Vaderech. They explain themselves very well as to why they say what they said. The time of Beit Hillel, and they also explained according to the reasoning of Beit Hillel. So they knocked out Beit Hillel and they explained their own reasoning. They knocked out Beit Hillel when they were speaking about Uveshoch B'Kov Kamecha, that those two words refer to the time as opposed to the way. And they knocked out Beit Shammai also when they gave their reasoning that what does it mean? Uvelech Derech, that's to teach us the way that we can recite the Keriat Shema. You can recite it however you want to, of course, as long as you're not lying on your back, as we learned in the practical halacha. Omri lach Beit Shammai, my time lo amri ke Beit Hillel. Let's go back again. Ela Beit Shammai, but Beit Shammai, my ta'ama lo amri ke Beit Hillel. Why does Beit Shammai not speak about arguing back and answering Beit Hillel's arguments? In other words, why are they not discussing the issues like Beit Hillel did? They're not giving enough. Omri lach Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai answer, meaning Beit Shammai would say to you. The truth is Beit Shammai never said it to us. But the expression Omri lach comes to say that were we to ask Beit Shammai, you can be certain this is how Beit Shammai would rightfully answer us according to their logic. Imkain, if so, in other words, if we follow the opinion of what Beit Hillel say, Neimakra, the verse should say, let the verse say, Baboker uba'erev, in the morning and in the evening. It shouldn't have said, B'shoch becha uvekumecha. Uv'shoch becha uvekumecha. Doesn't have to say, in your lying down and in your getting up, in your lying down and in your getting up. That doesn't teach me the time. Because if I were to learn time, it should have said to me, Baboker, do it in the morning, uba'erev, and do it in the evening. So how can Beit Hillel come to learn that it means morning and evening time period, when in fact it should have rather just said Baboker uva-erev? My b'shoch b'ka uva-kumecha. Beit Shammai is answering up Beit Hillel. What does it mean that it says in your lying down and in your getting up? B'sha'at shchiva, at the time of lying down, shchiva mamash. It's teaching us we should lie down proper when we recite the Keriat Shema. In other words, it needs to lie down, recline, in the sense of reclining on the side of the body, as opposed to doing it lying down flat on our faces or on our backs. Ubishas kima, and at the time of getting up, kima mamash. It means to say we do it in a way of standing upright, which means to say Beit Shammai would answer back to Beit Hillel and say Beit Hillel's reasoning is not good enough for us, because Beit Hillel's reasoning doesn't help us understand the way that we should do it if they're trying to teach us that we should do it in the morning and the evening. If it was to teach us the morning and the evening, the pasuk should have simply said, Baboker uva erev. So Beit Shammai has what to say. Beit Shammai, we have to ask a question now. On Beit Shammai, Hi ubelechdecha vaderech, that it says, and in your going along the way. Now, according to Beit Hillel, when it says in your going along the way, what did Beit Hillel teach us that was all about? Beit Hillel was saying to us that ubelechdecha vaderech is actually teaching us the way that we should recite it. Well, if it's teaching us the way that we should recite it, then what would Beit Shammai understand this expression to be? If Beit Hillel are saying, you know what, Beit Shammai, the truth is, I do know how to recite the Keriat Shema in the morning and in the evening, and that I get not from the expression of Uvashoch B'cha Uv'kamecha. I get it from the expression of Uvelechdecha Vaderech, which teaches me along the way, when you go along the way, however you're doing it. So then it leaves a question against Beit Shammai, because Beit Shammai have to answer up. What does this expression mean when it says Uvelechdecha Vaderech? My Aved Lehu. What are they going to say about it? What are Beit Shammai going to say about the expression Uvelechdecha Vaderech? If Beit Hillel say Uvelechdecha Vaderech refers to the way that we do it, but Beit Shammai already said that the way we do it is told to us through Uvashoch B'cha Uv'kamecha. What are Beit Shammai going to explain to us are the words that say Uvelechdecha Vaderech? How will they understand it? Hahu mibaya lehu. That's look at the Tanya. This we need it for what is taught in a brisa. B'shiftecha b'veisecha. I'll tell you how you can explain it. It works as follows. The brisa comes to teach us that when the verse says b'shiftecha b'veisecha, in your sitting, in your house, what does it mean in your sitting in your house? Pratla osek b'mitzvah. This is referring to the fact that it's coming to teach us that it excludes a person who is occupied in a mitzvah, which means the only person who's obligated to recite the Keriat Shema, according to Beit Shammai, is a person who's sitting around at home. He's doing nothing, meaning whatever he's doing is irrelevant to mitzvah observance, and therefore, since he is not engaged in mitzvah observance, meaning he's at home, he's sitting around. So if he's sitting around, recite the Keriat Shema. But if a person is occupied in a mitzvah, then he's exempt from reciting the Keriat Shema, according to Beit Shammai. And indeed, this is how we think. This is Torah thought. This is the way that we think in Torah. A person who's occupied in one mitzvah is indeed exempt from another mitzvah. We can only perform one mitzvah at a moment in time with a physical body. So what does a person do, practically speaking, if he's engaged in a mitzvah and another mitzvah comes his way? So we say that, of course, if he's engaged in a mitzvah, he's exempt from another mitzvah, because we can only engage in one mitzvah at one point in time with one physical body. Therefore, says Beit Shammai, it's coming to teach us that b'shiftecha b'veisecha is that when you're sitting at home, meaning you're not engaged in a mitzvah, but were you to be engaged in a mitzvah, you would be exempt from reciting the Keriat Shema. Uvelechdecha vaderech, and therefore what do the final words mean when it says, and in your going out along the way? Says Beit Shammai, these words come to teach us something else different, interesting. Prat comes to exclude lechatan. The fact that it says in your going along the way means you should do it in a general sense. However, it excludes the chatan, because the chatan is involved in some sort of activity. The chatan is the groom, and he's getting married. And he is exempt from reciting the Keriat Shema, certainly on the first night of his wedding, according to the Gemara, of course, not according to practical halakha. We're learning it in the Gemara at this point in time. The discussion that we are talking about is as it pertains to the Gemara, not pertaining to practical halakha. But according to the Gemara, this chatan is certainly exempt from reciting Keriat Shema on that first night of his wedding, when he gets married. Prat lechatan, says Beit Shammai. It excludes the chatan. Mikan amru, from here the sages said, Hakoines es habasula, somebody who enters into a marriage with a basula, a woman who has not been intimate before, a virgin, patur. He is exempt from reciting the Keriat Shema. Ve'ez ha'almana, but if a person marries an almana, a widow, a woman who has lost her husband, chayav, he is obligated. A man who marries a virgin is exempt from reciting Keriat Shema. A man who marries a widow is obligated to recite the Keriat Shema, according to the teaching of Beit Shammai. Let us take a look here for a moment at the practical halakha. One who marries a virgin is exempt from reciting Shema for the first 3 days and 4 nights following his wedding, says the Magen Abraham. If he has not yet consummated the marriage, it was customary to exempt a groom from the recitation of Shema on his wedding night. But that is no longer the practice. See below, as we're going to read about in just a few moments. And there again, bringing the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. So practically speaking, the Chatan, today's times, is not in any way exempt from the mitzvah of reciting Keriat Shema, as was in previous times where he was exempt. Why would he be exempt? What is this thing about marrying the virgin and the thing about marrying a widow, that in the one case he's exempt and in the other case he's obligated? Let us continue inside the Gemara to see more about this discussion. My mashma, the Gemara asks, where is this implied? My mashma, where is this implied? How in the world did Beit Shammai come along with this teaching and say to us, this comes to exempt a person who's obligated in a mitzvah, or it comes to exclude the Chatan on the one hand, but nevertheless, the one who marries, the Chatan who marries the Basula is exempt, but the one who marries an Almana is obligated. Where do you see this? I mean, if he gets married, let him say that he is exempt, whoever he marries. What's the difference? Where did you learn out that if he marries a virgin, he's exempt? If he marries a widow, he's obligated. Omar Rav Papa answers, and he says, Ki derech. You learn it out from the word derech, a way. My derech rishus, just as it is, that it's the way that is rishus, it is voluntary, meaning to say a person can choose to go on a journey, or he can choose not to go on a journey. Afkol rishus. So to everything that is voluntary, he is obligated. In other words, anything that is derech, just as a journey along a specific way described in the verse is voluntary and involves no mitzvah, so to all those who are obligated to recite Shema are engaged in voluntary activities. However, one who is engaged in the performance of a mitzvah, like a groom, is exempt from the obligation to recite the Shema. Milo askinan. Are we not occupied with the ka azel lidvar mitzvah? Perhaps, maybe, we're actually obligated with something that goes in the way of a mitzvah. When we speak about derech, maybe we're speaking about something that he's going to do a mitzvah. V'hafilu haki, and even so, Omar Rahmana likri. The verse, the Torah comes to teach us that he should read it. Which means to say, maybe, how do we know that derech is referring to something that's voluntary? Maybe derech is referring to something that is a mitzvah-related matter, and actually he should read it in any case. Im kain, if that were to be the case, lichtov rachmana b'sheves uveleches. The Torah should have written in your sitting and in sitting and in going. My b'shiftecha uvelechtecha. What does it mean? In your sitting and in your going. B'sheves didach uveleches didach. Hu de mechayavas. In your sitting and in your going, that is where the obligation pertains to. Ha de mitzvah petiras. But when it applies to a mitzvah, then one is exempt. And so we see over here that the Chatan, of course, is engaged in a mitzvah. There is a mitzvah, number one, to be married, and he has an additional mitzvah that will occupy him for the evening in which he has to consummate the wedding night. And therefore, since he's engaged in that mitzvah, he once again will be exempt. Let us just take a look at these notes over here. One who marries a virgin, we're talking, sorry, this is still continuing. Sorry. We continue here. If so, if that's the case, and you say that a person is engaged in a mitzvah, and therefore he's going to be exempt from reciting the Keriat Shema, even somebody who enters into marriage and he marries a widow, also he should recite the Keriat Shema, because he's also involved in a mitzvah. He is getting married. How come, according to Beit Shammai, that when he married the Basula, he is exempt from reciting Keriat Shema, but when he marries the Almana, he is obligated in reciting the Keriat Shema? Answers the Gemara, ha terid, the halot terid. This one is occupied, preoccupied, and this one is not preoccupied. This is very difficult to understand as far as I'm concerned. But nevertheless, the principle that the Gemara is teaching us is that the man who marries a woman who is a virgin is more involved and occupied with this mitzvah of consummating the marriage than the man who marries a widow. She already had relations. Perhaps, for example, he's worried that he won't be able to consummate the night, he won't be able to consummate the marriage. Perhaps he is also worried that he will not fulfill the halachot correctly. One who gets married, he marries a virgin, he needs to know all the halachot that pertain to the wedding night. There are many, many halachot. Those who wish to learn it in more detail are welcome to speak to me, where we engage in the learning for Chatan lessons. And here we begin to learn that the Chatan has to be aware, basically, of what is happening during this evening, because he has to know whether or not, when he is engaged in the relationship, this intimate relationship, whether or not she will become tamei, impure, as a result of the consummation of the relationship. And of course, if he does not consummate the relationship, then at this point in time, halachically speaking, she will not yet reach the point of being impure, that she will be forbidden to him to have to engage in a process of purity yet again. And the halachas are complex. They're not straightforward. We need to examine them in detail to see exactly what's happening along the way. But the basic principle is, maybe, I'm thinking to myself as I read these words, it could be that when we say that he is preoccupied, not that he's preoccupied so much with the mitzvah that he's involved in the evening, but maybe he's worried about how the whole mitzvah will unfold, that he's going to fulfill the mitzvah entirely and all the halachot will be observed. Whereas when it comes to marrying the widow, he will not be engaged in so many halachot as he would be with regards to the woman who is a virgin, because of the issue of blood flowing and the breaking of the hymen and so on and so forth. There are many halachot involved in this, and maybe that's what's bothering him. So he is highly engaged and preoccupied with this evening that he's going through, whereas the one who marries the widow is not so occupied as the one who married the virgin. It could also be that he himself could be on his side, and maybe it's difficult to understand as far as I'm concerned. Nobody necessarily said he was. Maybe he's just preoccupied himself, but if he marries the widow, he could also be a virgin, and he could also be preoccupied himself. Is he going to fulfill this mitzvah as he should? So it's not quite straightforward to me. I'm happy to hear any other opinions. If anybody is listening to the Shear and would like to make their comments below as to exactly what it is that he's so burdened by, because why should he be more burdened by the relationship with a single woman who had never been married before and she's a virgin in comparison to the woman who is a widow? Why shouldn't he be as preoccupied with both? In that with the virgin, he is exempt from reciting Keriat Shema because he's preoccupied, but with regards to the widow, he is considered not preoccupied, and therefore he must recite the Keriat Shema. The Gemara continues. If you want to say that the whole reason that he is exempt is because of something that he is preoccupied with, meaning if a person is preoccupied with something that's bothering him, and therefore what? He won't be able to concentrate. See, that's the thing. If a person is preoccupied to such a degree, like with the mitzvah of consummating the marriage, he's not going to be able to concentrate on his Keriat Shema. Now, in today's times, that is the very reason that we say that the Chatan, of course, he must recite the Keriat Shema, because today's times, people in any case don't concentrate so well. But in those days, it could be that when he said his Keriat Shema, he was concentrating hard on Keriat Shema. He needed to focus all of his attention. However, in today's times, since people don't concentrate so much in any case, and finish, let's get on with the show already. So therefore, since the person is not concentrating so much in any case, we don't worry that he's preoccupied with other things that are going to have an effect on him and will make him lose concentration on what it is that he is currently doing. That's basically what we're worried about. We're worried that the person will not be able to focus on saying the words of Keriat Shema because he's focused on the nut that he is engaged in to fulfill this mitzvah of consummating the marriage. So we're speaking about a burden. If your mind is too occupied, you're exempt from reciting the Keriat Shema. Fine. If we say that he's going to be exempt because of something that burdens him, even if his ship is sinking in the sea, also he should be exempt. How come? If the ship that he owns and has his property and his belongings on it is sinking, he's going to be thinking about the ship and all the money that he's going to lose. And therefore, comes out, he's exempt from reciting the Keriat Shema because his mind is otherwise preoccupied. And if you say, so also, if you want to say like this, then why did Rabbi Abba Bar Zavta say, Amar Rav, that Rav said, Avel chayev b'chol hamitzvahs. If you're telling me about being burdened on your mind with something and therefore you're exempt, then this teaching that we're reading about of Rabbi Abba Bar Zavta, who said that Rav said the following, should not apply. What did he say? Avel chayev b'chol hamitzvahs. A mourner is obligated in all mitzvahs, ha'amuras b'Torah, that are written in the Torah. And Avel, a mourner, is obligated in all the mitzvahs of the Torah. Just because he's mourning doesn't mean he's exempt. Chutz min tefillin, with the exception of tefillin, meaning on the day of the funeral, on the day that the funeral occurs up until the time of the burial, he is exempt from the mitzvah, and on that first day of mourning, he is totally exempt from tefillin. Afterwards, he is obligated to tefillin. But on the first day, certainly, he is exempt. Shehadei ne'emar, because it says by him about the tefillin, pe'er. It's something that's glorious, majestic. Tefillin are called majestic. Shene'emar, it's written, pe'erecha chavush alecha. Your majesty you shall bind upon you. Bind your splendor upon you. Therefore, we see this note here. It is inappropriate for a mourner to wrap himself in phylacteries, tefillin, with regard to which the term splendor was employed. If a mourner who is clearly pained and preoccupied is obligated to recite Shema, it was just a tefillin that he didn't have to do, then certainly all others who are preoccupied, even one whose ship sank at sea, whose loss was merely monetary, should be obligated. Why then is a groom exempted because of his preoccupation, and one who lost his property is not? So we're speaking about different elements of being preoccupied. And according to the logic of the Gemara at this point in time, anybody who is preoccupied with the mitzvah, or better yet, he is preoccupied, that is what we said. Somebody whose mind is preoccupied is exempt from the mitzvah of Keriat Shema. So this is the answer. Hassan, over there, tirid tirda the mitzvah. That's the answer. There, he is preoccupied with a preoccupation, the burden of a mitzvah. Hacha, but here in our case, Tirid, tirda, drishus. He is burdened and preoccupied with a burdening, something that bothers him, of something that is voluntary. Which means to say the one is an actual mitzvah. He's preoccupied with fulfilling the mitzvah of being married and consummating the night, consummating the marriage. And in the second example of the ship, that is something which is resut. So he has a choice whether he should be preoccupied with his money being lost, whereas there's no mitzvah to be preoccupied with that. Whereas there's a mitzvah to be preoccupied with the night where he's married and he has to consummate the wedding, consummate the marriage. One who marries a virgin. Let's take a look at all these points here. First of all, the halacha. A mourner is obligated in all mitzvahs except for mitzvah phylacteries. One is prohibited from donning phylacteries on the day that he buries his deceased relative. Brought in the Rambam, brought in the Shulchan Aruch. You can check it out in more detail. The notes. One who marries a virgin, a mourner, ostensibly, one could ask why a mourner is not exempt from reciting Shema, as one cannot dismiss his preoccupation by characterizing it as a preoccupation of a voluntary act. He is obligated to mourn the death of a family member. Nevertheless, there is a distinction between the preoccupation of a mourner and the preoccupation of the groom. The preoccupation of the mourner is his personal reaction due to his personal pain over the death of his relative. However, not only is the preoccupation of the groom due to the mitzvah, it is also a preoccupation stemming from his preparation to perform that mitzvah. So he's really in a situation that he's got a lot that he has to deal with, and therefore he is exempt. So we will stop over here because we're going on to a continuation of this discussion, which will take us a little bit further. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Eliyahu Shear from Chesed Ve'emet, coming to you from the holy city of Yerushalayim. My website, www.lovingkindness.co. If you've enjoyed this video and got something from it, please click on the like button, the thumbs up button, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and click on the bell button to be notified of new shiurim so that you can enjoy further shiurim that we will hopefully be bringing out in the future. If you can, please do make a positive comment below if you've enjoyed it, or anything that can, a question or discussion that you'd like to speak about the shiur. I'm happy to reply. And please share this video with friends and family and try and get the message out there of what we're doing. We need as much support as possible, and we ask for your support as well. So please come through to our site, see what we're doing, and become an active partner in our activities by becoming a member of our site and taking a part in what we're doing, sharing these videos. And of course, you'll be helping us if you support us and do become a member, to be able to obtain the equipment that we need to produce these videos, to have the time to prepare it and edit it, and also to be able to share a lot more. All these videos, of course, are currently provided completely free, and it is only due to your support that we are able to do it, and we will be able to do it with your support. So please come through and help us. For those who wish to contact me in person and send me an email, please see my site and contact me via the contact form on my site. I'd be happy to reply. Let's speak about Torah, let's speak about life, let's speak about anything that's on your mind, and let's learn together and grow together. Of course, if you want to learn privately, I'm available for private learning. Take a book of your choice and let's go through the book at your pace and at mine also, and let's learn together and grow together. The mistakes we make together doesn't make a difference. We will grow together and we'll be successful together. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to another shiur soon, and hope to see you soon. Wishing you all the best. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.